People who have been the target of murderers/assassins, how did you survive, and why did they target you? They missed. That's about the only reason. It was a random act of violence. A man ran up behind me, put a gun to my head and shot. He flinched, or I did, and he missed by an inch. Blew out my left eardrum and burned my hair behind my ear. He ran off immediately after. Cops said it was probably a gang initiation thing. I have deafening tinnitus now and horrible anxiety in public. I'm not sure if it counts, but a few years ago in high school, there was this guy that used to trouble everyone by taking naked photos of them when they were changing after PE class. I happened to be one of his targets, so I reported him to my teacher, and eventually he got suspended for about a month and had to attend counseling sessions. One day I was at the bus stop waiting for my bus when suddenly I felt a push on my back and I fell onto the road. Luckily for me, the bus driver stopped the bus in time and I survived. However, I fell directly on my arm and it was fractured. Last I heard, he went to the juvenile center and no one ever had to see this devil again. I've posted about this before. I was in a really bad abusive relationship. He had many mental issues along with diabetes. This doesn't excuse any of it, as he was aware of what his body was doing, and he never got help, but it's important to know it didn't exactly come out of the blue. One night, he seemed bored and started trying to stick his feet in my face. I pushed them away, disgusted, and he exploded. It was a whole lot of action. He started by trying to choke me. I freed myself by grabbing a cat brush, the kind with the sharp metal points, and pushing it into his chest. He let me go, but pushed me to the ground and lifted his airsoft rifle and drove it to my head, like he was trying to cave in my skull. At the last moment he hesitated. I ran out of the apartment and called the cops. It didn't occur to me until later, when I was with a public defender documenting my injuries, that he had really wanted to kill me. I had bruising so deep they were black in color. In places I don't even remember him hitting me. He really would have, if something in him hadn't hesitated. No way to prove it, but had all the lug nuts on my truck's front passenger rim loosened, which caused death wobble so bad I almost crashed in the fast lane of the freeway. Luckily the rim stayed on. I had ghosted this one guy and part of me suspects he came and loosened my lug nuts in retaliation. My boss discovered it, being the nice guy he was. I was on an almost school shooters list and my friend tried to befriend a kid with pretty badass pictures. He was known to have horrible anger management issues, always got in a lot of trouble, and was somewhat infamous, but we thought he deserved at least a couple friends. The plan was to just kinda sit with him at lunch, and apart from that carry on with our lives as normal. But being he had very little social skills, never had friends, and no boundaries, he didn't know how to handle it. Very sad. He would come up to us at bad times while I was at practice, talking to girls or teachers, and would message us online day and night. We tried to have a talk with him about boundaries and how friends give each other space etc, but this just made him feel rejected and infuriated him. He became more obsessed and more persistent. Around this time I got my first girlfriend and started hanging out with her at school, so my other friend was the one who had handled it more than I did. A few weeks later found the kid beat the shit out of my friend. He got stopped by other kids and the campus police officers. He was expelled and sent to a school for people with disabilities. I was honestly relieved he would be somewhere more equipped to help him. After that I kinda just forgot about it. About 3 months later I got called into the administration office and walked into a room with the dean of students and a police officer. I started panicking because in those days I smoked a lot of weed and thought I might have gotten caught. I was informed that the kid's mom found a list in his room of maybe 10 people that he wanted to shoot. We were number 1 and 2. His parents were divorced, and I guess the dad had guns, so the mom panicked and called the police. The officer asked me if I was scared. I said no, I thought the kid was a kind to make empty threats out of anger and wouldn't go through with something like that, but my friend was terrified. I don't know what came of that from a legal standpoint. Last I heard the kid got help and figured it out and is going to college. He actually messages me happy birthday every year. I don't respond. About a year ago, I was walking my dog at night when I saw this really beat up old Honda Civic pull up on the other side of the road. I noticed that two similar cars positioned themselves on the roads perpendicular to me, both behind and in front of me. I was boxed in. This kid no older than 19 gets out with two other people, and the kid reaches for a gun in his waistband and makes a beeline towards me. A random car passes, and they all scatter. Once the car is gone, they come back and try to do the same thing, but another random car passes again, and they take off. I made the quarter-mile run home in about 2 minutes. My guess is I was the victim of a gang initiation, and they ran away when witnesses saw. Edit. I've been getting a lot of comments about how I'm a slow runner. My dog is old, and I have knee and back injuries from years ago. Sorry, I'm a turtle, I guess, lol. It wasn't a murderer, but I was on a hit list of a student at my school a few months back. I was put there because I was a good friend of everyone else on the list. The police came to my house and asked me questions about them. Overall, it's fucked up. Edit. Clear things up. The reason he had a hit list in the first place was not because of bullying, it was his parents and he needing to take out his anger on others. Also, the people on the list were his other friends. He had several mental illnesses that could have made it worse. While it seemed strange at the time, I actually didn't find out about the circumstances until 20 years later. I worked at the White House during the Clinton administration in a capacity and was traveling on a trip to the Philippines and the APEC conference in Jakarta, Indonesia. We had flown into Manila late and hopped on the bus to the hotel with the staff motorcade. Everyone was pretty awake and we were all sing on the ride to the hotel. About 45 minutes into the ride, I look out the window of the bus and we are on a narrow road lined by corrugated tin shacks. It really seemed strange at the time, since why would the road from the airport to the nice hotels in Manila have to go through this neighborhood? We eventually arrived at the hotel, and it was quickly forgotten. 20 years later, I'm watching a series on the History Channel about the United States Secret Service. This one episode was about how the Secret Service coordinates with intelligence agencies, and talked about on a Clinton trip to Manila where they overheard Al-Qaeda was talking about a wedding cake under the bridge. Wedding cake was a known code word for bomb. Clinton was diverted to the alternate route and undoubtedly got to the hotel a lot quicker than we did. It turns out there was indeed a bomb under the bridge on the route to the hotel. I was obviously not the target, but it was crazy, and many of us could have been collateral damage. This girl who thought knew me messaged me on Instagram. Even though we never met, we continued talking. Turns out she had a boyfriend who went to my school and he threatened to kill me if I didn't block her. He actually brought a knife to school that day too. Nothing happened to me, while the kid with a knife was expelled after a teacher saw the knife in his backpack. Not sure if this counts as I wasn't the intended target, but my dad ran a chapter of a fairly notorious biker gang, notorious enough to get their own episode of Gangland. Once my dad left, a guy who never really liked him all that much took his place and insisted that, since he was no longer in the gang, he needed to get rid of his tattoo. My dad told him to go pound sand. Surprisingly, that didn't go over particularly well, and he ordered his SUV bombed. We lived in an apartment complex at the time and they blew up the wrong SUV. Thankfully no one was inside either. As far as I know, that was the only attempt on his life, at least as long as I've been alive. Edit. Sorry for the poor phrasing. I'm not dead. Thank you all for your totally really concern. It technically wasn't a murderer or an assassin, but I was a combat medic in the army for 4 years. It was a small patrol in Helmand province, Afghanistan. We knew it was rather hot area for insurgent attacks and that's why we patrolled it so heavily, but we were moving through a small group of compounds and houses when we were ambushed by a small group of insurgents with AKs and RPGs. During the very start, a RPG landed 7 meters from me and threw me to the ground. A friendly soldier was also hit by the shrapnel from the RPG. While he was down, he was hit 2 more times by AK fire. I took a man and I dragged him back into a ditch we were taking cover in, while the other man covered us with the M249 pip. We had to move, so I put him on my shoulders and carried him to a rather big pipe under a bridge. While I was trying to get his vest off, I noticed that I was now alone. The rest of the patrol had forgotten about us and moved in the compound for better cover. I didn't know where they were at the time, but I was trying to call on the radio for their position. But I needed to tend to the injured man while I was trying to stop the bleeding from the shrapnel. The 2 rounds were stopped by the body armor we wear on our plate carriers. While I was tending to him, I heard footsteps above me. I made a dumb decision to tell out our squad's lingo, walk with a white rabbit, run with a red queen, and no one responded, so I knew it was enemy at that point. I pulled out my M9. My M4 was under the downed man. Because he rolled over it, a single man jumped down behind me and rushed me. We struggled for the gun for a couple of minutes, until I got my hand free, and pulled my bayonet, and swung at him. It cut his arm open pretty good, and started gushing blood very fast. I went to go stab him, but he grabbed my arm and we went to the ground with me on top. I pushed the knife down on him with him resisting, but I eventually got the knife in his chest after 5 to 6 minutes of fighting for his life. He slowly started squirming his legs and screaming, and I covered his mouth so any other insurgents heard him and came to help him. After I was sure he was dead, I went to start helping our downed man again. I kept calling on the radio for help, but it took 4 minutes for me to get a response from a British outpost, who sent out a MRAP and Warrior IFV to help. After I stabilized the injured man, I started feeling pain in my leg, and turns out, while fighting for the knife, he stabbed me in my leg with a AKM bayonet, which was still in my leg. I pulled it out and threw it on the ground, and just about at that time the British QRF arrived, and a medic and a specialist carried me and the downed man to the MRAP. I found out later that our patrol squad had abandoned us and retreated back to the American outpost. The commander of that patrol was court-martialed 3 months later. I was a photojournalist in an unnamed Central American country doing humanitarian coverage for a college. Suddenly there were riots against the government and officials started shooting people with cameras. My group was chased, so I had to change my appearance, that is clothes, hat, satchel, and ditch my camera to an in-country contact, and acted like a normal student to smuggle my SD cards in little slots I cut in my shoes until I got to the US, where I took them out and just had them in my pocket so to not arouse suspicion bites at 10/10ths would do again. I can actually answer this. I lived below an insane person in a shared house. For the record, I lived there first. Insane person wanted the entire house to rent, tried to force me out many ways, making noise, having people creep around and knock on my windows, call the cops on me for no reason, etc. So one day he lit a smoldering fire in the non-functional fireplace. We were told never to use it and closed his off, forcing the smoke to fill my apartment. We luckily got out, but the hospital said 1 more hour in there and we would be dead. Me and my husband spent several hours in the hospital on oxygen. My dad had replaced our smoke detector literally 2 weeks prior to this incident as we discovered it was broken. Since the laundry was in my part of the house, insane person could totally have come in and tampered with it, but I have no evidence of this. The funniest part of the whole thing was when I called 911 and the fire trucks showed up at 3 AM. Insane person cussed me out for calling them. The second funniest part was work tried to get me to come in that day, since nobody could cover my shift. All that effort to rent out a teardown house in a sketchy neighborhood. This was when I lived in Cleveland, the kind of nice part, but really they are all just oases in a sea of drug and gang neighborhoods. No one thinks of Cleveland as the gang-filled city, but seriously, live there for 5 minutes. We didn't get in the news, but we had issues the whole time I've been alive, up until moving away finally a year ago. There had been a string of violent rapes of women out jogging in the mornings before sunup. That neighborhood was desperate to appear hip and millennial Y, and had built up a bunch of wannabe cute shops and such all along one road, attracting the young who want to live in cool areas, artsy, etc. But none of them understood what they were really moving into, and as a result, they were all just ripe for the picking, because they were oblivious and thought that it wasn't really the inner city if it had a chippetal next to a dozen of cute buy my homemade sweater / yak butter / organic produce shops in it. So this rapist had gotten 4 girls so far, snagged them off the sidewalk, beat them, raped them, and left them bleeding on the ground. I had a new dog at that time. I thought I needed one for protection, and it had been 2 years since my husky girl died. I ended up with a big red standard poodle, 6 years old, with a history of aggression and attitude problems. I love that guy. He's still with me. I do dog training, so managing a dog like that is nothing, and I figured that a dog with a hair trigger is probably good for a young lady living alone anyway. We lived in an apartment, and the only way for him to potty was for us to go on 10 walks a day. Basically, I never skimped on those walks. We would walk miles for at least 2 of them, and practice our behavior on the way. Well, this morning it was dark, 4:30 am, and I had only had my boy for about a week and a half. We were doing well. On our 3rd block or so of the walk, I didn't notice that a guy stepped out behind me, either from behind a hedge of one of the nice houses, or between this spa building and the next one. All I saw was his hand and the butt of his gun come up in my right periphery, I assume for a pistol whipping. My dog noticed though. He turned around, savage like I had not seen him before, and I've never seen him like that since either. I'm pretty sure that first snap got the guy straight in the dick. Good dog. He was holding his gun the wrong way around, by the barrel, luckily, so we didn't get shot right away, and my dog must have startled him so badly that he didn't even think to do anything except run. My dog chased him 3 blocks, while I chased after them, because I was terrified I was about to lose my new dog. Eventually, my dog came dancing back to me. Think poodle prancing like a little frou-frou doggy dancer, because that is exactly what he did, like a frilly silly thing. So proud of himself, and I just hugged him. I guess that guy learned that just because a poodle looks like a silly pom-pom pillow prince doesn't mean he won't eat you for dinner. Unfortunately, as much as I would like to just joke it all off, losing us and being humiliated must have enraged him. He did get another girl that morning, in front of a house we could see from my apartment porch. It was the most violent attack he'd done so far. The woman almost didn't survive. He beat her so badly she ended up in a coma for a bit according to the news, dragged her between 2 cars parked on the street, raped her there, dragged her into the bushes of the house, and left her for dead. That was his last attack, at least. The cops finally caught him, before he could go again. I lived in Cleveland for several more years, before I finally witnessed a murder, and had to watch cops show up late with cheeseburgers from McDonald's hanging out of their mouths, to tell all of the witnesses from 3 households that we all imagined the exact same thing. They took so long to reply to all of our frantic and detailed calls that the murderers had time to clean up the body, the shells if there were any, and let the rain wash away the blood. They drove off in 2 separate cars with the body in one of the trunks, not even speeding. Because why would they? No one was coming to stop them. I decided to get out then, and was gone finally 2 years later once I managed to buy a house half the state away. Don't let anyone try to sweet talk you about Cleveland, or defend their cops. The corruption, laziness, and resultant crime is out of control. They don't even have the decency to be ashamed of their own uselessness and incompetence. Not sure if this one counts, but I was born in Iraq at the very start of the war. My parents tried shielding us from the war and death outside, but sometimes things just happened, the likes of which they had no control over. I was about 5 years old. I can't remember my exact age, but all I can remember is that I was too young to attend elementary school. My mom was getting my siblings ready for school, brushing my sister's hair, and I was sitting on her tailoring bench with a curtainless window behind me. I remember playing around with some pins she had laying around. My grandma, alive at the time, was watching over me, so I do not fall. Thus when a pin dropped from my hand to the floor, she was quick to tell me to pick it up so no one would step on it. I bent down to pick up the pin and I hear a pop, similar to the popping sound of a balloon. I glance back, and the window was gone, and all I hear next is my sister scream and start crying. My mom quickly yelled for all of us to get against the wall and to get away from the window. As we all look around the room to see what happened, we see a bullet, as long as our index finger, in the middle of the room. One of my brothers goes over to pick it up, but it was too hot to touch. The next day we go over to the police and all they can do is tell us that it was a sniper bullet and they can't do anything about it. I assume that a sniper saw me just sitting there in front of a window and took the shot, but it missed me when I bent down to pick up the pin, so it went over my head, grazing my sister's arm, before stopping on the floor. When I was young, my mother was an EMT. We didn't have a lot of money, so we moved around a lot, but I was a happy enough child. A few years ago, I was visiting home and saw the autobiography of a local murderer on my mom's table. She's not one to read those types of books, so I asked about it. Turns out that, when I was younger, she and her partner responded to a call and found a body behind a dumpster. She had to testify in court, eventually putting that man behind bars. Shortly after, she began receiving threats, mainly directed at me. Every time she got a threat, we moved, making her feel safe until the next letter mysteriously showed up. As far as I know, nothing ever came of the threats, but I also didn't even know they were happening, so I may have just been young and naive. Not sure if attempted murder, well probably. Guy ran me over while I was on a bike, because I was texting with his girlfriend. I didn't even know they had a relationship. Dumb me didn't call the cops and let my uncle handle it. Wish I just pressed charges. For more funny Askreddit stories, please subscribe and like the video.